Well, it's a joy to be here and a joy to be back at CBRT. I think I've done this at the Kalamazoo Country Club. We're in a different room this time than the last time I was here at the University Club, and it's just good to be here. Are you guys busy lately? Man, life is busy. I feel like every moment of every day is choreographed, isn't it? You get up early, you try to work out, you try to spend some time in the Word. The kids are already up by then, so that gets interrupted. You get breakfast, get them out the door, go to work, come home. There's activities after school. It's just, man, every moment is booked. Does anyone else feel that way? And this is a sidebar as we get set up, but man, we gotta fight for that disciplined pursuit of less, don't we? Of putting the best things first and the first things first, and really fighting for that in these busy times and taking time to think, right? To be good stewards. You know, it was John Maxwell that said leadership is influence, and while I agree wholeheartedly with that definition, if I got to put my definition in the dictionary, I would say leadership is stewardship. And what is stewardship? It's simply to care for something, right? That everything we have, and Mark said this so eloquently, everything we have and everything in life and all the people and the relationships and the resources and the opportunities and all those things, when we really are honest and humble and we boil it down and we distill it down, they're all by the grace of God. Very few are those that I manufactured myself. Very few of those open doors are things that I willed into existence or willed into happening, and rather, everything for a reason and a season is on loan to me for an unknown amount of time. And what I do with that is ultimately the measure of me, of my leadership, and of God being able to say, well done, good and faithful servant, amen. And so it's in that spirit that I want to share a little bit of the story of our brand. I bet a lot of you know a little bit about Chick-fil-A. I bet none of you know everything about Chick-fil-A. We're a new brand in Michigan. There are only 11 stores in West Michigan and about another 9 in Detroit. And this is a focus market for us where we can grow and where there's alignment between a lot of the Christian principles and values that our brand holds dear and that our guests and community that we get to serve here in West Michigan hold dear as well. And you know, one of the things that I thought a lot about when I was preparing today is the parable of the talents, right? We've all heard this story, this parable that Jesus teaches in Matthew 25, where he kind of paints this illustration that different people, by an owner, right, by a leader, by someone probably not all that different than you or myself, were given varying levels of resources, right? Some 10, some 5, 1, right? And we know the guy with 1 buried it in the ground, didn't do much with it, and the owner wasn't very happy with that. But those that had 5 or 10 took what they had, no matter how large, how small, they took it, they multiplied it, they grew it, there was fruit, and they were rewarded with even more by this ownership figure who ultimately is God in the parable, right? And I think God is pleased with multiplication, he's pleased with stewardship, but there are also these stories throughout God's word. Noah is one that comes to mind, Daniel is one that comes to mind, and so many others where the Christian faith was almost down to one man, or one person, right? That the Israelite nation was almost down to one or a small handful of individuals. I think of like Caleb and the spies that go into the promised land, right? There was these just so minuscule, so few numbers, it was almost like the Christian faith was going to be snuffed out, that God's work was going to be snuffed out, and God used a couple individuals to steward what was entrusted or cared in their care to them to keep the faith going, to share God's message with more people. And so what I would like to kind of take that, and by no means am I suggesting that Truett Cathy is one of those heroes of the faith, but what I would like to suggest through both those biblical stories and what I want to share today about him and about our brand is that the faithfulness of one person, the faithfulness of you, the faithfulness of me, the faithfulness of one individual can have reverberations throughout generations. That one person who makes that commitment that Mark was talking about to remain faithful, to hold strong to the gospel, to live those principles in their work on a daily basis. I believe if you read and study the story of Daniel, that there is no better way that we can be a witness for Jesus Christ than to be excellent at our work, to be excellent at what we do every single day, to be consistent in what we do every single day. I believe there's no greater testimony than that without saying a word. And if we can do that, if we are willing to be faithful with whatever it is, no matter how great or small that we've been entrusted with, we can make a difference at last generations. And that's what this man did. This is Truett Cathy. Truett Cathy's son, Dan, is the chairman of the board of Chick-fil-A. His grandson, Andrew, is the current CEO. And he, I would say, is the ultimate, maybe the best, arguably, rags to riches stories I know. Rags to riches story I know. So how many of you know a little bit about Truett's story? Just maybe a show of hands, a couple of you. If not, I invite you to read a little bit about him. There's a couple books, one called Eat More Chicken, Inspire More People, and I would encourage you to read that. There's also a wonderful book called Covert Cows that's written by our former Chief Marketing Officer, Steve Robinson, and I would highly recommend that one to you as well from the perspective of a different officer. But the story of Chick-fil-A, this was a fledgling business that, without the Lord involved, probably would not have made it out of the 1980s. And yet today, it is largely recognized as the number one QSR, quick service restaurant brand, not just nationally, but in the world. And I don't mean this in any kind of demeaning way, but the average Chick-fil-A does 3 to 4 times the revenues of the average McDonald's with 10,000 less stores and being closed on Sunday. And I would argue that a lot of that is God's faithfulness to a brand that started with one man who was faithful. Truett Cathy was not college educated. Truett Cathy only finished high school. Truett Cathy came from essentially nothing. And yet in his book, Steve Robinson, when he writes about Truett, he said, there was a line item I couldn't figure out. It was very discreet in the P&L. In the early days, I was at Chick-fil-A and I went to the CFO. At the time, there were only about 16 employees. And he said, what is this? What is this huge line item in our budget? We're struggling to stay afloat. And what he came to find was even in the earliest days when Chick-fil-A was on the verge of going under, Truett Cathy was tithing through the business consistently. He was a faithful man who applied the principles he knew of his faith and walk with Jesus Christ and did not waver from them. And I believe years later, God has honored that in an amazing way. And I feel privileged to be just a small part of it. And so a little bit about Truett. Truett was born in the days just before the Great Depression and spent much of his childhood in Atlanta, Georgia in the Great Depression. His father was in his life, but I wouldn't say active in his life. He was largely a failed businessman. He was kind of an insurance salesperson. He did not do very well, and because of this, suffered often with depression and was just really not engaged in family life. Truett writes in some of his accounts that he never saw his mother asleep his entire childhood. Think about that. To make the family make ends meet and to stay afloat, they had boarders or renters that rented rooms in their house in order to help pay the bills. And so when Truett went to bed, his mom was cooking and cleaning for them, and when he woke up, she was doing the same. And a little fun fact, the way that she made chicken for them in a kind of double-sealed pressure pan is the inspiration and still, I can't give away too much, still a little bit of the formulation of how we make the original chicken sandwich today from his mother that he never saw asleep in those amazing days. And so Truett actually helped pay the bills. And the way that he did this was he had our little red radio flyer wagon that was kind of handed down to him. And he would troll around his neighborhood. He was also a paper boy. He had various ways he earned income for the family. But one of the ways he did this was and this is kind of legendized in all of our stores, but Truett would meander around his neighborhood with this little red beat-down radio flyer wagon, and he would sell bottles of Coca-Cola for 5 cents. And Truett learned the value of listening to his customer, or what we would call our guests today. He learned the value of listening to his customer. And what he did is he talked to people in the hot Atlanta sun. They said, I'd pay a little more if you put these on ice. If they were cold, I'd pay more. And he thought, that's pretty smart. So he haggled with the local gas station. He got some ice, and he would sell them for 10 cents and increase his margin because they were on ice and cold. And if you walk into any Chick-fil-A store anywhere in the country, including ours just down Lake Michigan Drive, there's a community table. Fun fact about the community table, it's actually, those tables are built by men who are coming out of incarceration. There's actually a letter taped on the bottom of ours from the man that manufactured our table, and he talks about how Chick-fil-A saved his life and led him to the Lord because of the work that he gets to do. But that chandelier that you've probably seen and maybe never noticed above every community table in every Chick-fil-A all across the country and now in Puerto Rico and Canada is made out of smashed glass Coke bottles. If you haven't noticed that, go look up and look at it. It's made out of Coke bottles, and that's a heritage and kind of an honoring of Truett and his entrepreneurial spirit in his early days to help make ends meet in his family during the Great Depression. So after those times, Truett, again, just didn't have the means to go to school. That wasn't even an option for him. So he went and served in World War II. He was never in active combat. He kind of had some desk jobs. He worked as a mechanic a little bit. Which really resonates with me. My grandfather did the same thing. My grandfather was a mechanic. He was an entrepreneur. When he came back from the war, he owned 2 gas stations and then was a Napa franchisee. So he worked with his hands, served in Germany, repaired planes, repaired Jeeps, things like that. And he's kind of a gearhead. And so Truett's story really dovetails with my own family's, which is kind of neat, my Grandpa Hiller. But when Truett got back from the war, he and his brother Ben just wanted to figure out we don't know much, we don't have much, what can we do to make a living? We don't want to work for the man, we want to figure something out, what can we do? And so they scraped together, between a loan and all the pocket change they could find, they scraped together about $10,000. And they bought used building materials, and they set up shop in Hapeville, Georgia, which is right outside Atlanta. If you've ever been there, there's now a large Porsche manufacturing plant, but it used to be Ford at the time, Ford Motor Company. And it was right near Delta's headquarters as well. And they scraped together these $10,000. They bought used wood from like demolished houses, and they built this little ranch house almost called the Dwarf Grill. And the reason it's called the Dwarf Grill is the Dwarf House. It's going to look like a house, and it was very, very small. If you go today to the Dwarf House, you'll see that it is now memorialized in this massive building, but it still has the footprint of the original diner, which had only 10 stools and 3 or 4 tables. It was very small, and it was open 24 hours a day, 6 days a week. And so Truett lived in a little apartment behind the building with his brother Ben, and it was gravel intentionally because the gravel would wake them up, and they would take shifts sleeping during the night. And then when somebody would roll in, they would hear the tires, it would wake them up, they would fire up the griddle, and they would go in there and they would cook some burgers, flip some burgers, and serve these third shift employees, second shift employees that were getting off at Ford, that were getting off at Delta. And today, the deep relationships that Chick-fil-A has with Delta, used to be Ford, Porsche, and Coca-Cola, are largely rooted in Truett's service to his community and those employees that he served through the night, 24/6, never on Sunday. Truett would write and say in his books that he was just utterly exhausted. And so he not only needed Sunday just to recover and get his head right again, but it was a day of worship. It was a day to praise the Lord that had given him so much. And when he later married his wife Jeanette, it was a day that they would teach Sunday school and they would raise their children in the church and be involved in their community. And so during this time, Truett served a lot of different things. The menu at the Dwarf House, again, lots of fun facts along the way. There's a concept, have you ever read about the Little Blue Menu? Has anyone read about that? There's one opening in Maryland. It's kind of a delivery-only ghost kitchen concept that we're toying with. We did one in Nashville. We're doing one in Maryland now. The reason it's called the Little Blue Menu, I feel I'm taking a tangent here, but I feel very privileged to have worked for a couple phenomenal organizations that had amazing founders, one being Homer Stryker and the other being Truett Cathy. And I do think I feel very privileged to the homage and the honor that the founders of those organizations are paid by their organizations. I don't think anyone honors their founder better than Stryker and Homer Stryker. Our leaders used to say, Stryker is a person, not a company. And that's true with Truett Cathy, and I think Chick-fil-A just pays him such honor in an amazing way. But the store in Maryland called the Little Blue Menu, the reason it's called that is the original menu of the Dwarf House was on blue paper. It was the Little Blue Menu, and if you looked at it, there was a steak sandwich, there were burgers, there were things that you could never get at Chick-fil-A today. But Truett was experimenting with different, more sustainable ways that he could have different menu items. And so one of the things he was messing with was he remembered his mom's chicken sandwich, he remembered his mom's pressure cooking method of cooking chicken, and he was just tinkering, he was experimenting with it. He tried it with different coaters, he tried it with different crumbs, he tried it in different oils, he tried it on different buns. His guests told him, it's too bland, so he tried mayonnaise. They didn't like that, it was too soggy. So then he kind of got it down where they liked it, but it was a little bit too sweet, and then they said, you need something salty on there, and he thought, pickles. Let's tinker with that, and so he put 2 pickles on the bun, and finally, after about a 4 to 5 year period, the thing was selling like hotcakes, and he's like, I have this right. What do I do? How do I scale this? During this time, I think I glazed over this, but his brother actually died in an accident. So you think about adversity and all the things that Truett overcame. So he's running the business by himself now. And he thought, maybe I'll license the sandwich. So think about gas stations, grocery counters, these different stores being able to have the recipe, have the equipment, and sell it. And so he tried that, and the sandwich scaled pretty quickly, but what he found when he would go around to these various locations is that quality was just awful. People were serving it soggy, people were making it wrong, people were letting it sit out too long, they were making too many, there was waste. And he immediately kind of scrapped these plans and took it all back and said, we've got to do something different. And this is where franchising came in. Now this is all these years, 20 years have probably passed now, and now we're in the late 60s, and malls were starting to pop up everywhere across the United States, shopping malls. That was kind of the thing to do, right? It was the social outing of the weekend. And so Chick-fil-A in this time got into franchising. So this is actually Truett's grandson, Mark Cathy. I probably snapped this picture about a year ago. Another fun fact, if you ever heard of Louis Giglio, the very famous pastor, Passion Church, I believe, in Atlanta, the original Chick-fil-A logo was his dad's handwriting. His dad helped create that logo. So another fun fact for you along the journey and all these different relationships. But this is an exact replica of the Greenbrier Mall 1968 first Chick-fil-A location. It is the storefront of the catering center for the Dorf House that exists today in Atlanta. The Dorf House is essentially my Chick-fil-A restaurant plus a whole nother diner. It's massive, and they have their own catering center, but they've made this storefront that looks just like the original. And in the early 60s, they had an unbelievably hard time getting into malls. Why? Because Truett would not open on Sunday, and Sunday was the #1 shopping day in every mall in the Southeast. And everybody said, no, we don't want the smell of chicken. We don't want the smell of, at the time, shoestring potato fries. We don't want a business that's closed on our busiest day. And so in 1968, they were able to wedge their way into Greenbrier Mall, but it wasn't, their growth was very stunted. The business was very, very fledgling. Jimmy Collins, who was the president, I know this is hard to see, would write postcard. He was said to have written a postcard a day to every mall real estate company in the whole nation. This one, it's kind of cute, but it says, "Dear Mr. Wolf," who's at the Rouse Company, which is in Columbia, Missouri, but they own several malls. He says that Chick-fil-A are high, I don't know if you can see the crescendo on the letters, our high top meringue pie, which is a staple at the Dorf House still in Atlanta. On the lemon pie is made from fresh egg whites, Jim Collins. So he was known to just every day, postcard. And after about 3 months of this, the guy called him and said, "No more postcards, we'll do a deal." His persistence ultimately paid off. And then once people saw the same store sales, once they saw the takeoff and the explosion, from 1968 till about 1980, rapid growth in the Southeast, but all in malls, all tied to malls. And as you can imagine, being in bed with the mall really created risk for the business. So in the 80s, a lot of us know, I hear the stories now where we have a very good interest rate on our mortgage, but some of our friends haven't lately if they've moved. And my parents are like, 6%, we paid like 14 on our first house, right? And that was in the early 80s. And so as the recession hit, and Chick-fil-A was in the 20s in terms of employees and really trying to grow but struggling mightily, in 1982, Truett called his executive team together, kind of said, what are we going to do? Do we have to fold it up? Do we have to take on more debt? What are we going to do to get through this? And I don't think any plans came out of the meeting, but the only thing, these are actually two of our leaders. This is Jordan. He leads our drive-through, and David's no longer with us, but he led our kitchen for a time. So these are a couple of my guys that took a trip to Atlanta with me. We try to do that multiple times a year to help them see the story and see what it is they're a part of, because it is pretty special. But what came out of that meeting, more than any other strategy or plan, was Chick-fil-A's corporate purpose. Truett's son Dan said, why are we doing this? It's hard right now, but why are we doing this? And there was almost this 2-day retreat to create this message, which I'll talk a little bit about more at a personal level later. But this is Chick-fil-A's corporate purpose statement. We have our own local interpretation of this at our restaurant, but the corporate purpose of Chick-fil-A is to glorify God by being a faithful steward. Leadership is stewardship, being a faithful steward of all that is entrusted to us, and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A. And that was what emerged from that seminal moment in 1982, was this corporate purpose, to glorify God by being a faithful steward and to have a positive influence on every life touched by this brand. And I hope you would say that we're doing a pretty good job of that. We're trying. Our vision today is to be the world's most caring company. How rare and cool is that? And I feel privileged to be a part of that. But this is memorialized outside the Corporate Support Center in Atlanta as a reminder of kind of that difficult moment. And from the ashes, if you will, of 1982, what emerged was the first freestanding restaurant. And this is arguably what changed the brand. In 1986, the first freestanding restaurant was built in the Atlanta area. It had a drive-through. Picture kind of Checkers or Rallies. It had the two-sided drive-through. And since that point, you've seen the rapid, methodical, steady, but calculated growth that Chick-fil-A has experienced now into the Midwest in almost every state. And we just announced we're headed to the UK before too long. And so now a little over 3,000 stores across the country. But it was this seminal moment, getting back to the basics of who is our provider and why do we do what we do, and who is the Lord of all that ultimately holds this business in his hands. And so when I think about Truett, if I could summarize this principle of leadership is stewardship, that the faithfulness of your faithfulness, you individually, my faithfulness, me individually, Truett's faithfulness, one person can make a difference and a ripple effect for generations. I believe that's true. I don't probably think about it as much as I should, but I think his life is evidence that it can be done if we stick with the God that loves us and that has given us so much. And so when I think about Truett, what 4 principles can we apply here? And I'll kind of turn the mirror on you, but let's study Truett for a second. The first is taking advantage of opportunities, or specifically unexpected opportunities. Truett always kept a little kind of budget or line item, it was said, at the corporate level for what he called unexpected opportunities. One of those unexpected opportunities is something called Berry College. So there's a university, kind of a Calvin type of size university in the greater Atlanta area called Berry College. And Berry was going under in the late 90s. And Truett came to his executive team and said, I want to buy this place. His executives are like, you're nuts. No, we're not buying a college. We're not buying the land. We're not buying the university. And he kind of said, tough. And he bought it. And today it's called WinShape and LifeShape. And so many people don't know this, but Chick-fil-A and the Chick-fil-A Foundation have an organization called WinShape and LifeShape. And what they do there, Truett fostered many children throughout his life. He was a wonderful parent. He loved children. He was a Sunday school teacher, but he was a foster dad to many, many children over his lifetime. And thank you. And at Berry College, it became LifeShape. You can go to a LifeShape or WinShape camp today. You guys can send your kids in the summer to Atlanta and this Berry College campus and have their, hopefully, life shaped, hence the name, by Truett's simple generosity and having those funds set aside for unexpected opportunities. He maximized everything he had. The knowledge he had was biblical. He didn't have higher education. He didn't have a master's degree. He didn't have much of anything, but whatever he had, he maximized. And I think that's really powerful. The other thing is principles and priorities. One thing we do at our orientations is we all have to wear a name badge, and we give that name badge to our new hires in a little jewelry box, and we slap a verse on there. It was Truett's life verse, and it's Proverbs 22:1 that says, a good name is more desirable than great riches. And that was his life verse. That was something he took to heart when he was a young man. And he said later in his life that, he said, I'd like to be remembered as one that kept my priorities in order. I think I would too. And so he really lived for those things. The other thing that I think I admire for Truett as a business owner, we're all hungry, we want to grow, but he was always about quality before growth. Quality before growth. He would always say, if we get better, our customers will demand we get bigger. If we get better, our customers will demand we get better, and it's just all about, in what we do, it's all about execution. We got to be good every day. We got to be consistent every day. You'd rather have a consistently bad cup of coffee than not knowing what you're going to get every day when you go through the drive-thru, right? And at least you know what you're going to get, and we've got to be good, and we've got to execute. We've got to do that well every day, and so it's about quality before growth. And the other thing is just about people. I want to share 2 brief Truett stories that have always inspired me deeply. The first is about Truett's volunteerism. This man, what I mentioned earlier, just we're all so busy, the world's moving fast, and Truett found time to give, and to give of his time, even more than financially, of his time. And so there's a story that I'll never forget. Truett was active in his community, and there was a family that had a son with special needs, and they'd been married almost 30 years, and they just had never gotten away. No date weekend, no overnight getaway. And they finally, in the kind of the Florida Panhandle area south of Atlanta, just over the Florida border, they had found this adult daycare. And they thought, finally, like, our grown son, we can put him here safely for 24 hours. Let's go to the beach, one night away. We'll come back and get him. It's going to be awesome. And so they drop him off, and they're headed to the beach, and they just have this freeing feeling. They stop at a rest area, and it was kind of the time between and before cell phones. They got a page. And so they went to a cell phone, I don't even know what to call it, a payphone. And they call the adult daycare and they said, I'm really, really sorry, but your son is not doing well. He's angry, he's just unfamiliar, he's lashing out. And they're just crushed. I mean, here's our opportunity, right? 30 years of marriage, here's our chance. So they're kind of dejectedly driving back. They get another page, they pull over, they go to another payphone, and they said, hey, I think your son's okay. Somebody's here, and he's taking care of him. And they're like, what? Who? They said, well, there's this man. He's in a rocking chair, and he's holding your son. He's rocking him in this rocking chair, and it's going to be okay. Your son's doing good. And they're like, can you go ask him his name? Like, who is that guy? We don't know anybody. They walked over. There's a pause. They come back, and they said, it's Truett Cathy. He's rocking your son in a rocking chair. And so this family like went on this streak where they like dined at Chick-fil-A for like 5 years straight with one meal a day, just something crazy like that. But like, who does that? Man, a faithful steward of all that's been entrusted to him. My other favorite story, I'm going to go over time. I'm really sorry, but I'm just having fun, is Eddie White. So Eddie White was a renowned, well-known, very influential superintendent of schools in the greater Atlanta area. Eddie White didn't come from much, didn't have a dad in his life, and he worked at the original Dwarf House Grill. And he was one of Truett's employees, and Truett would meet with his employees and say, "What are your dreams? What are your dreams? What are your dreams?" And Eddie said, "I want to go to college. No one in my family's ever gone to college. I want to go to college." And so some of the waitresses and hostesses got a hold of this, and they had a big, industrial-sized empty mayonnaise jar. And they cut a lid on it, they put a piece of tape on it and said, Eddie's College Fund, and they stuck it on the counter. And so everybody's putting their pocket change in, $1 here, $1 there, quarter here, quarter there. And it adds up to be a lot, but it's nowhere close to enough to pay for Eddie's first year of school. So the end of the summer comes, and Eddie wants to go somewhere, and Truett calls him in, and he says, "Hey, here's the jar." And then he hands him a personal check for the balance of his first year's tuition. He says, "Go make something of yourself." You fast forward today. These are my hooligans. There's 22 of them. Today we have a program called the Remarkable Future Scholarship, and it memorializes what Truett did for Eddie. How many of you have ever bought a bottle of Chick-fil-A sauce at the grocery store? Next time you do, first of all, I want you all to do it. Second of all, the next time you do it, I want you to read the label. And what the label says is that Chick-fil-A takes no profit or royalties from this bottle of sauce, and all of it goes into a self-funding, into perpetuity endowment to fund scholarships for team members. Our first year open, we had 11. Last year, we had 22. And all these kids got at least $1,000 or $2,500 to further their education. It's amazing, right? The stewardship, the faithfulness of one man. And so as I try to land the plane here, I want to talk about my own journey and my own struggles, my own wrestling with God. I knew probably 5 years into my striker journey that it wasn't the end game for me. I love the organization. I wouldn't be where I am if it wasn't for it. But I knew there was something, but it was probably 4 or 5 years of like, okay, all right, God, what is it, when, why? And I remember in probably 2018, Chick-fil-A hosted it was more or less a recruitment event, but they're just trying to attract franchisees in the Detroit market. And there was an event at a hotel, someone I knew was speaking at it, and I thought to myself, maybe I'll go, just get more information. I was deep in research. I was looking at some other opportunities. I was looking at acquiring a different business. I was just in that state of searching. And I went, and the leader, who is still one of our executive leaders, got up and he said, "Before I go any further, I need to ask you the question, do you want to own a restaurant?" And I knew the answer right away was no. I knew it. I mean, I was so discouraged that day because I thought, man, the more I learn about this brand, their purpose is my purpose. Their values are my values. I think I'm onto something. I had Chick-fil-A for the first time when we played the University of Virginia in college in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2005. I'd never had it before. We had 2 sandwiches on the bus after the game. I thought, wow, this is really good. And it was kind of that treat every time you went south of Tennessee, you got Chick-fil-A because it wasn't in Michigan, right? That's about all I knew. And I thought, man, maybe I'm onto something. He asked this question. It was such a wise question to ask. All these people think they want to run a Chick-fil-A, right? And looks like easy money. Looks great. It's hard. And he asked this question, and I knew the answer. And the answer is no. I didn't want to own a restaurant. I wanted to own a business. I didn't want to own a restaurant. And then in my wrestling, I felt like Jacob when he got his hip popped out by God, right? And he's wrestling with God, and he sleeps on the rock pillow, right? And you guys have read that story. And he's going through all these. He's wrestling with God. I was wrestling with God. And I love Tim Keller. I know he's heavenward now, and he's just made a big impact on my life. And Redeemer City to City is one of his ministry's initiatives. And they published this book about Christianity in the marketplace. And Sean Milan was a former pastor in Ireland overseas who went into the heart of one of the most difficult places of Dublin, and he opened a coffee shop in partnership with Tim Keller's ministry. And he talked about what it did, and he talked about how it shaped that community. And this quote, this is before I got into the franchise selection process, but this quote split me, the way that God's word divides bone and marrow, right? It just really split me. And I took a picture of it a couple nights ago. And I'll read it to you, but it says, social businesses can engage in all kinds of activity, from manufacturing to design, recycling, and education. Anything you do can be a ministry through business, right? But a social business seeking to be part of a gospel movement should give attention to food and hospitality. It is significant that Jesus teaches his disciples to remember him with a meal. At meals, hosts, I love this, hosts create space at the table for others who don't own the table but get to sit there. What takes place around a table is more than the sum of its parts. If a social enterprise can run a business that creates space at the table for the outsider, then they mirror the work of God in a special way. I said, all right, I guess I'm going to own a restaurant. Okay, buckle up. And here we are. We opened in October of 2014. We found out April 1st of 2021 that we were offered a contract. It was a whirlwind, uprooting the kids, selling the house, moving up here, not that far from Kalamazoo where we were. And probably the number one question I've gotten is why? Stryker seems safe, it seems secure. Like, what are you thinking? Got that a lot. And to be honest with you, this is one of the most scariest thing I've ever done in my life. People say, oh, it's Chick-fil-A, it's a slam dunk. Well, try serving record number of guests on your first day when no one knows what they're doing and you're trying to train the team, and you got to be good. And if you're not good, people are not happy, right? This thing is hard. But it ultimately, for me, started with common purpose. I would use different words, but my personal purpose is to glorify God by being a faithful steward of all that's entrusted to me. And I think if you're a Christ follower, it probably is yours, maybe in your own words as well. I love what we get to do at the local level. I just love that. I love being involved in the community. I love it when something breaks. I take it to my guy, Joel. He's my welder. He fixes it, and I bring him free food. I love that. Man, it's so cool. We showed up at Helen DeVos Children's Hospital last week with 75 8-count nuggets in the cancer ward. My mother-in-law died of cancer back in February. We go down there every month, and we just give away food to these people doing chemo. How do 8 chicken nuggets with a pack of sauce make you smile like that? I don't know. Man, it's so cool. We got a catering order the other day from a guy that had a double lung transplant, and he was craving Chick-fil-A, so he's a business owner in Saginaw. He bought Chick-fil-A for the entire floor of his nurses last year. This year he called it his 1-year anniversary of his lungs-iversary or something he called it. And we did this huge order for those same nurses, and we celebrated with him yesterday that he is breathing well with 2 new lungs. Like, how does chicken do this? It makes no sense. It's the faithfulness of the Lord. It's the faithfulness of one man who didn't compromise on his principles on giving up Sunday like the rest of the world to go play travel sports or be open another day of business, who didn't compromise and was faithful to God, and God has been faithful to our business. And then finally, changing lives. I heard a podcast in my searching and wrestling where a Chick-fil-A owner-operator in Virginia used the line. He said, I run a leadership development company disguised as a chicken restaurant. And I thought, I did the same noise you just did. And it's what I do. It's part of what I do. Man, I've seen lives change in 2 years. I've seen people grow. Our business is complex. I mean, we're basically a 2-shift manufacturing plant. We got things going on around the clock. And if you want to learn how to lead in business, it's a great proving ground, just nobody thinks of it. Man, I can teach you a lot about manufacturing operations in my restaurant. It's cool, but it's complex, it's hard. And I just love that I get to do these 3 things every day. That's my why. And I call them my hooligans, but these are some of the fun things we get to do. We sold 1,100 sandwiches at the game last weekend. 1,100. It's unbelievable. The faithfulness of God to this brand and these young people and the things in the community that we get the privilege to do because we stand on the shoulders of one man who remained faithful to the Lord through a lot of different things. So I would just bring this back to you as I close. Your faithfulness to Jesus Christ, your faithfulness to your people, your faithfulness to your business and your community can shape generations. It's a deep challenge. You may not have thought about it before, but your faithfulness can reverberate through the generations. And so using Truett's kind of questions, I would kind of put this back on you as your closing challenge to think about is what opportunities are out there, even unexpected, that you might seize for the good of the kingdom through the vehicle of your business and through the people that you're serving. What principles and priorities do you need to hold dear? Do you need to not compromise? Do you need to not give in? No different than what Truett did. Truett, I think God holds us accountable to what we know. So we have varying levels of knowledge, right? But to whom much is given, much is expected in return. And so Truett, though he wasn't college educated, he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer, he was faithful and held strong to what he knew. And I think that's a good challenge for all of us. Quality before growth goes without saying in business, right? But if we're better, our customers will demand we get bigger. What does that look like for you? And then finally, people. How can you love on your people just like he loved on Eddie White, just like he loved on that young man with special needs? How might you get out and be a good steward of the people that have been entrusted to you? So I hope you learned a little about our brand. I hope you are challenged in a positive way. And I hope that you'll join me in this daily grind and challenge of being a good steward of all that's entrusted to us to the glory of God alone. Will you pray with me? Father, I just thank you for your word. I thank you for this time, and I thank you for heroes of the faith, just the men and women in our lives, not just like Truett Cathy, but just mentors, pastors, teachers, heroes of our own lives that have impacted us. Thank you for their faithfulness, God. May we be faithful. Help us to be good stewards, to run the race well, and to finish well for you, God. Even today, help us to go out and be just faithful stewards of all that's entrusted to us. Help us to remember leadership is stewardship, and help us to care well for whatever it is you've given us. We ask your blessing on all these things. In Jesus' name, amen. Thank you.